Welcome to Uptown Rumble, heavy music in the Bronx. My name is Steven Payne, director of the Bronx County Historical Society. Today is April 10th, 2025. Ray, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Um, I go by Rey. People in my personal life might know me as Roberto Correa. Some of you may know me as Rey Correa. But we're here to talk about some music.
Awesome. Thank you, Ray. Now, Ray, why don't you start off by just talking a little bit about your family history and background and whatever you know about how your family ended up in the Bronx?
So that's kind of a funny story because I was just talking to my grandfather about this the other day.
Wow.
So sometime in the 50s, I guess he had some relatives already here in the Bronx. He was living in Puerto Rico and he got some money together and was able to get himself a flight to come to New York, and he started just working odd jobs. And like, it's funny, I didn't know too much about like necessarily his work history. I just remember him always telling me like, I had like 20 jobs at different points, where like the last place he ended up was like at a gold factory, and I
Oh,
guess
wow.
he would make like gold chains and all this kind of stuff until the factory shut down. Well, I'm not sure if he worked until the factory shut down, but he got to like to get his pension, retire, and just be all right. But I know he also went back to Puerto Rico at some point in the 60s, like just maybe homesick or something, when he met my grandmother. And then, you know, it's kind of how that went on.
Do you know, like, which part of Puerto Rico
Yeah,
he's from?
my grandfather's from Lajas, and
Okay.
my grandmother was from Carolina. Yeah,
Okay, I
so
see. I see. And
yeah.
did he share like how they met?
So my grandfather was friends with her
Okay.
younger brother, who now lives out in Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he just kept showing up over to their house, and like he had a big crush on her, and like, you know, the persistence is key sometimes,
For sure.
and
For
like
sure.
eventually like he stopped showing up, and like she started to miss him a bit, and she started asking him around about him, and then, they just got together and got married, and they were married until 2007 when she passed away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Um, Now, when after they got together, do you know what part of New York or the Bronx they settled in?
So to my knowledge, um, they started off down in Brook Avenue.
Okay.
So right off the 6 train, 2 stops in.
Yeah.
But it's funny, like if you go on YouTube, you can see a video that someone took where like they're driving down that area, the South Bronx, and it's just with a camcorder. I don't know. It was like in maybe the late 80s, maybe early 90s.
Yeah.
But it was destitute, and that's the South Bronx that I remember, when there was shit all like built up there. The only thing that was still there was that pizzeria on 138th and Brook Ave,
For sure.
Golden Pizza.
For sure. Everything
Yeah,
else was like empty
like
lots and
empty lots and
rubble, right?
everything, and like the junior high school was still there, but it was under a different name back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was growing up, it was Alexander Burger, I think it was called.
Yeah.
But yeah, but they went from Brook Ave. They moved a little bit more up in the Mott Haven area, and
Sure.
that's where I grew up.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. So you've now I guess your family's been in that same spot for three generations now, right?
Yeah, well, my mom actually moved out to California,
Okay.
and then but then I grew up with my grandparents out here in New York.
I see. I
Yeah.
got you.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Wow. Wow. Now, you mentioned just now a little bit about what the neighborhood was like when you were growing up, but talk some more about that, sights and sounds, like people in the neighborhood, like, maybe families that your family was close with or friends that you remember, just in your childhood. Like, what are some things that you remember about the neighborhood?
So it's kind of funny because a lot of the way that you see your life is it's in retrospect.
Sure.
It wasn't until that I was talking to a friend that also grew up in a similar area that I realized this is kind of funny. But like, I don't think I met a white person that wasn't like a police officer or a doctor or anything until I was like in the fourth or fifth grade.
For sure. For sure.
So it was like
Absolutely.
everybody there was either Puerto Rican or black, and there was a few Mexicans that was hanging around, but
Yeah.
it was most of us.
For sure.
I was
sure.
the whitest guy in the Bronx.
Now, what elementary school did you go to?
So originally I went to what was then PS 27, then
Okay.
became 277. That was right across the street from St. Mary's Park.
Sure.
And then I got transferred over to PS 31, but the building was under reconstruction my entire life. Like that, I never got to step foot in the building. And we went to, so we shared a building with the junior high school, not too far off. I think that was IS 151.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see. And what were your experiences like in those schools?
It's crazy, bro. I
Yeah.
mean, the thing is that, like, I don't know if it's the same for kids growing up in the area now, but like back then, it was, the rules were different.
Yeah.
Just to say it like that, it just, there wasn't like a recording of everything like there is nowadays. So like, people got away with a lot more stuff.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, but dude, you also had the veil of innocence. For me, I had the veil of innocence like when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Especially because like I grew up in a super religious household.
I see.
So like, those kind of thoughts and everything didn't really occur to me until I was a little bit older, and I started realizing, oh shit, this is kind of working a little bit of a different way out here.
Yeah. Now, what church did your grandparents bring you to?
So that's funny because they raised me as a Jehovah's Witness.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, super religious.
Super religious.
I see.
No Christmases, no birthdays, no celebrations.
Wow.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So I'm sure once you start getting into music, and we'll talk about this more, that probably brought up some like, tension and stuff like
there's
that.
definitely some conflict. Absolutely.
Yeah. We'll unpack that a little more. But before we get there, just to paint the picture of your childhood a little more, what are things that you remember eating? Whether in your grandparents' house or around the neighborhood or things like that.
Shit, I was a picky eater as a kid, man.
Yeah,
But the thing is that, like, rice is always a mainstay in a Puerto Rican household.
For sure.
Salchicha guisada, pollo guisado. Like always rice and beans.
Absolutely.
But like, just typical food.
Yeah.
My grandmother used to always make pasteles.
Yeah, sure.
And we had a big old freezer, and like she would stack them all in there and then sell them, like to be able to get some extra change in our pockets, And my grandfather is a brilliant man. He's 93 years old now, and he's still kicking. But like, he's a funny dude. But he was the kind of guy that would like see like a washing machine on the street and then take it upstairs and like turn it on, listen to it, figure out why it was broken, and just fix it, and then sell it. Yeah. So the washing machine that he has in his house right now is one that he found and he fixed.
Wow.
My man had a second grade education. Like he started having to work the fields in Puerto Rico when he was like 7 or 8 years old.
Wow.
So he didn't really get to have a formal education. But it's funny because like he has a notebook at home, and like he'll draw stuff up, draw up little schematics and everything. And one day I had this electrician's guide, like a little I think it was called Ugly's Guide to Electricians.
Yeah.
And I compared like what he was doing. It was like, this is identical.
That's crazy.
I was like, this dude could have been an engineer.
Yep.
Like, if he had the proper like alleys.
Yep.
Funding, anything, he would have done so much more.
For sure.
But I mean, he still did great with what he had.
Wow, that's crazy. Now, why don't you talk some more about the projects you grew up in and what they were like at the time?
So the Betanzas projects were the ones that were closest to me.
Yeah.
But like my building wasn't technically a project. We were still
okay.
across the street from St. Mary's Park.
Oh, okay. I see.
We were like, you can't even, there's like no stores or anything literally like on St. Anne's Avenue.
Yeah.
Where I grew up on. So all of that was just buildings, small buildings. Like a lot of them were just along the way. There were just only like 5-6 stories. Then one of them was like 12 stories, and then you had the projects that were right behind in an alley, and then you had right across was another big building where
Sure.
we used to go because they had washing machines down at the bottom.
Course.
Like, well, like if it was down at our place, then we'd go across the street and get a little wash down there.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned the pizza place, you know, like the
Oh, that
the
was the
lone
best.
surviving
That
building.
was the best.
What are some other like restaurants or spots in the neighborhood that were like a part of your childhood?
So that's the funny thing is that like my grandparents were like super sheltered in,
Yeah.
I guess. So I didn't get to explore in a lot of restaurants as a kid.
I
Like
see,
it
I
was
see, I
just,
see, I see.
you know, like the meme of we got food at home.
Yeah, for sure,
was
for sure.
definitely it. You know,
For sure, for sure.
we don't got money to spend outside of restaurants and
Absolutely.
shit. We got food at home.
Absolutely. What about like stores, like, you know,
God damn.
anything like that? Like,
So that's the change in the Bronx. It's just like you remember seeing like all these personally owned places, all the small shops, and like you walk there now. Like I walk to the same neighborhood because my grandfather still lives in the area.
yeah,
And when I go see him, like it's unrecognizable. You know, there's a lot of new buildings. You know, so 6th Street here was Brook Ave, and then on the opposite side to the north was 3rd Avenue, 149th Street. You walk down 149th Street now, like they got this. I don't know. They got like these little benches, and what they try to make like a little park or whatever, and it just became like a homeless encampment.
Yeah.
For a while.
yeah,
It was funny, like, cause I was working at Manhattan beer distributors
yeah, sure.
for a while, so like I would take the 19 coming down from where I was in the Bronx, and going back to that old neighborhood, and I'm seeing like people popping firecrackers in the morning, jumping in front of the bus, and getting arguments with the bus drivers and shit. It was just a few years ago too.
That's
It's
right.
fucking hilarious. But the sad part is that the shift that came back from the 90s was like, you know, the use of heavy drugs and
For sure.
everything, and people on the street that were using and everything. And but the thing is that when I was a kid, it wasn't as open. Like,
Yeah.
you know, people were doing it on the roofs of buildings and staircases and shit. It was a little more like kept away,
That's right.
like hidden parts of the park or anything. Now, like, you know, you see people nodding out on the street and everything.
Yeah.
It's been a little bit different, I say, over the last year in the South Bronx, but it's just, you know, for me, it's a little like heartbreaking because it's like you feel a sort of kinship still to like the people there, and you're like in an almost familial sense where you're like,
For sure.
in a distant way, this is family.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like you don't want to see people like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Now, why don't you talk a little bit about, you know, in elementary and junior high, like, were there like cliques or crews or anything like that? Like, how did the kids like group
it's
themselves?
funny because the thing is that like until shit got like gang related,
Yeah.
which was at some point in junior high school, where like there were times where I remember they would let us out early on
Yeah.
certain days because they knew that there was suspected gang activity was
For
going to
sure.
happen, you know, Halloween, whatever, any big event, or like they would hear whispers and they're like, you know what, we're letting everybody out early. Sometimes they called the parents and everything. That at that time I went to IS 162, so if 27 was here, 162 was down the block, up on 149th Street, right at the corner of the park, and yeah, I just remember like that was like kind of like eye opening because it's like, what the fuck, people are getting like slashed and shit at school and everything. It's like, huh, you know, another one of those things where it's just like you lose that veil again.
Yeah,
You know,
for
that
sure.
shit that like the wolves pull from your eyes.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And what about you? Like, what kinds of kids did you hang out with, like in elementary, junior high?
I feel like for the most part, like I didn't have much of an issue getting along with most people.
Yeah.
But again, like I was I was the lightest skinned kid in class.
Yeah,
You
sure.
know, so like yeah, I had to face that, you know, so there's no like talking that kind of shit out. So
Yeah.
you know, you just learn how to handle situations however you needed to handle them. And unfortunately, I was a kid who was known to have a bad temper.
Sure.
But the thing is, I somehow got away with it a lot because teachers noticed how much kids were trying to pick on me. So yeah, he threw a stool or he threw a chair or like he flipped the desk over and hit somebody, but like, did you see what was going on to him before that
Yeah.
shit happened?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like Like, I guess I had a little bit of sympathy come my way
Sure.
because of that shit. But at the same time, I got into a fair lot of bit of trouble.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that like I was actually a pretty good student as well.
Yeah.
So
Sure. Sure.
there's a little bit of a dichotomy there, I guess.
Now, when you were growing up, I mean, I suspect the answer to this question in your household will be, not much at all. But what kinds of music do you remember hearing, in the neighborhood or
In my
in your
household,
house? Yeah.
it was kind of different because the thing is that like whatever was on like old Spanish TV,
Yeah.
that's what my grandparents were playing.
Okay,
So,
I see.
like every once in a while, like there was, of course, late '90s, early 2000s, you were listening to like Mark Anthony or
Sure.
whatever was going on. But the thing is that like I just had a curiosity for music much sooner, and like I, my grandparents weren't really necessarily the kind of people that would seek out music. Like there were no CDs really in their collection,
Yeah.
no vinyl. Like it wasn't until like recent time that my grandfather started having a vinyl collection.
Okay, I see.
Somebody gave him an old like record player with speakers on it.
Yeah.
He's like, you know what? Yeah, I'll take a few of these.
Wow.
So it's kind of funny. But music was always around me. My uncle played piano when I was growing up, and I thought it was so cool. Like, cause the thing is that he never learned how to read music. He never learned anything, So, but the fact that he knew how to do the chords and play some merengue and all that stuff, it was like, damn man, this is really, I want to do something like this,
Wow. So did he live close to you all?
So he lived with me when I was young.
Yeah.
Then he got married and he shipped off to Florida.
Okay, I
As
see.
many Puerto Ricans do.
Sure. Absolutely.
I think there was a stat they said one time that they said that there were about as many Puerto Ricans in Orlando as there were in all of Puerto Rico itself.
I know.
At that time.
So in this like family home, talk a little bit more about was it a 5-floor walk up that you all
So
lived
this
in?
one, no, it was a bigger building, so we had
It's
an
a bigger
elevator.
building, okay.
So
I got you.
We had
Okay.
the elevator and everything, but it's kind of crazy because like I left the state in like 2007. I moved with my uncle for about a little while. I lived in Florida for 6 months, the Orlando Kissimmee area, and then I moved up to North Carolina when the recession hit and there was no work.
Wow.
It's like, I had a cousin that was living in North Carolina, and like they're like, hey man, there's more work opportunities up here, you might want to like shift. So we went up there and I stayed there for about a year and change. But when I came back to the Bronx and I went to go see my grandfather and I see the apartment, you realize just how packed in everything is in New York, in the Bronx in particular. And you start seeing the infrastructure, you start thinking about like, man, this is emblematic of an era where like they built things intentionally this way. And airway is a funny thing because like I noticed how much better air flowed in these apartments than like even houses down south. So like you might have had bigger rooms and everything, but like everything is centralized air. And it's like,
that's right.
You crack open a window, it sucks.
It does, yeah, for sure. Now, so you mentioned that you were curious about music from an early age.
Yeah.
Do you remember like some of the first songs or sounds that like grabbed your attention?
I mean, it's hard to pinpoint like what was grabbing my attention like through elementary school or anything, because it was just I had no sense of what I was really listening to.
Yeah.
But when I discovered like punk and hardcore, like and then eventually metal, like that's when things started like clicking.
I see.
I got a piano when I was like 9 years old, and I started like trying to read sheet music and understanding what notes were and all of this. And then by the time I was in junior high school, because our class had music classes, you would put on a list what the 3 instruments that you wanted to play were, and I had the opportunity to play bass. And I was like, I want that shit.
Yes.
I wasn't even thinking about the other 2 instruments. I don't know what the fuck I wrote. I think I wrote drums and saxophone. I can't even tell you what I wrote. But I just wanted to play bass so bad.
Yeah.
And I got it. And you had to write like a semi essay or a few paragraphs about why, and like I try to talk about, like, again, my uncle, his musical influence, and like how I wanted to be able to participate in something similar. And yeah, but then I just started discovering music, and like the first, because I would go to California every once in a while to visit my mom, and I'd spend the summer with her and
Yeah.
see how the shift was and everything. But KROCK over there used to have like a hardcore hour, and
Wow.
like so, or they would play more intense stuff at
Yeah.
sometimes. And where like in New York they were playing, like whatever band of the year was, like Godsmack or whatever. When I was out in California, it was the first time that I ever heard like Suicidal Tendencies,
Wow.
and I was like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit! Like that band changed my life. The fact that I heard Suicidal Tendencies at like a tender age, I was like, holy shit! And then they said the name of the band
Yeah.
after. I was like, yo, I cannot tell my grandparents what the fuck I'm listening to right now. Like
That's
I
for
can't
sure.
I can't say that shit. And then you find DRI, and
Yeah.
then like you start, and then coming back to New York, and I'm like, yo, did anybody out here do shit like this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you start searching that shit. Like around that time was like when the internet era started growing, and then you start looking, and you're like, holy shit, there's all these bands from here that do this shit. And I found, I was a kid, and I found the Casualties at first, and then started seeing like Agnostic Front, and then I started seeing all these other bands, and then as I started getting into metal, I'm like, yo, Demolition Hammers from the Bronx, what the fuck is going on? And then like when I was in high school, like that was the era of like irate. So it's like you saw like Headbangers Ball, and they're playing the video for Vendetta, and you're like, what the fuck? You're like, you're seeing New York in the background and everything, and they're not from the Bronx, but like Sworn Enemy.
For
Like,
sure.
their videos were on Headbangers Ball, and you're like, what? Like, this world exists here. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Now, before you heard Suicidal Tendencies in California, were you already kind of like
I was shifting,
getting
yeah,
into
because,
heavy
because I
stuff,
was
huh?
listening to KROCK here, and like, whatever bands were going, like I had heard Nirvana and everything,
Yeah, sure.
and like because that's the most accessible thing.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, nobody was born with an '87 demo in their hands.
That's right.
Like,
That's right.
I don't give a fuck how true you are now. It's like you had to start somewhere.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Absolutely. In the 80s, it was with Poison,
Yeah.
and in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was with everything that was
Glad I
going
was
on
born
there.
when I was.
That's right.
I didn't have to go through that Poison
That's
stuff.
right.
Yeah.
I know, for real. Now, when you first started discovering like New York hardcore stuff, do you remember, what the first show you went to was?
The thing is that so my grandmother was really ill.
Okay.
Like when I was a kid, like it was really common for her to be in the hospital multiple times out of the year.
Oh, wow.
And the thing is that like even though I had like I don't want to say like a rebellious kick or anything, but I did have like an era in which like I had missed about 2/3 of a school year one time.
Okay.
To the point where they had they try to put I don't know, I guess like a PO or something, come to my house and interview me and
Yeah.
my grandparents and my family, and they're like trying to see the situation at home. They're saying, no, like this kid has two loving grandparents. It's just he doesn't want to go. He
Yeah.
doesn't want to do this shit, and I guess like because it's kind of weird to say, but I guess I got myself involved with a lot of shit, and
Yeah.
it's like I would show up for like 2 classes, and then it was just more chaotic, and we would cut class. And so this is by high school at this point, and I went to music high school. I was in the inaugural class of what became Celia Cruz Bronx High School of Music.
Oh, okay,
Right.
I
So
see.
the first year that we started, we were at DeWitt Clinton.
Yeah.
And by the end of the year, we got kicked out.
I see.
By the end of the year, like a school of 90 kids got kicked out of the building for getting in too many fights in what was at the time not a great school to begin with.
Yeah, that's right.
So we got kicked out, and we got sent to Walton High School,
Okay.
which is right there on Kingsbridge Road.
Yep.
But we took all our music courses down at Lehman College.
Okay, I
So
see.
Lehman College housed our music, and at that time, because you can't do jazz band all the time, I had to take up a second instrument. So as short as I am now, the smaller version of me, freshman year in high school, had to take up a second instrument, and I was like, you know what? Let me stay with something at least familiar as far as reading sheet music, and I picked up the tuba. Yeah, so
Wow. Okay.
yeah.
All right. Nice.
So, I mean, I did like state competitions. We did the NISMA stuff, like upstate.
Yeah.
So, I still got like a couple like the little trophies and medals that they give you for like placing in those. Yeah. So I had the group one and I got the individual. It's funny because that was the thing that mattered most to me. So like even though if I would cut most of the days of school and everything, I would always show up for music day.
Yeah.
It's like I don't want to I don't want to miss that part, you know. It's like, and I would show up for the days of reviews, so like I could go over all the material and then take my tests.
Yeah.
And it would piss my teachers off because the thing is that like I would get a passing grade, not just a passing grade on everything, but I would get a significant enough grade where it was like, I'm gonna be annoying about you giving me at least a 65 to pass me. Say, look, I showed up for your review, I made up a bunch of the homework, and now I passed your test. Like, just let me move on.
That's right.
Yeah. But some teachers were more amenable than others, and yeah, eventually, like I said, I left New York before I finished high school. I got my GED.
Yeah.
And like it was one of those things where like school was just not a priority to me at the time.
Sure.
And I went to the GED school. God damn, it was off the 2 line. I don't even remember the name of the school. It's one of those schools. So one thing that happened here in New York was that like every big school got repurposed.
Yep.
They had specialty schools that were placed inside, and now it's like technically 4 different schools in one big building.
That's right.
So this one was for GED schools.
Okay, I see,
and,
I see.
I show up into a course, and they're like, yeah, you got to kick it here for at least a couple of months. And I looked at them, I said, I don't got a couple months.
Yeah.
And so I was there for about 7 days.
Okay, yeah.
And I said, you guys are going to throw me onto this GED test. And I went in there, and like, I took the test. I fell asleep twice, and then I still got like, it was like barely any questions wrong.
Yeah.
Like, they were like, yeah, of course you passed. Have a good life.
Wow.
And I fucked off.
Yeah, sure.
So.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah.
Now,
sorry, I know the timeline is like super.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, that's how memory works a lot of times, you know. But you know, as you're in high school, and as you know, high school's not really catching your attention or anything like that. Talk some about like what was going on musically. I mean, you know, in high school, obviously you're playing bass and tuba, but like, what was your musical life like at the time?
So I was always trying to find people to play with, but it was more difficult.
Yeah.
So like I started getting a lot of the musicians that were in my school who played similar instruments, and I'm like, yo, check this shit out. Like, you know, this is Megadeth.
Yeah.
Check that out. Like, that's really cool, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like the stuff that we play, but like with distortion and stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, it's in an Eloian mode, right? Like, fuck. You know?
Did that work? Were there other kids who got into it?
They were interested, and like I got a bunch of people into different styles of music through that, and like even got the drummers. I like because one funny thing is that machismo is such a great thing because like you can egg somebody on into doing some shit.
For sure.
This guy's a jazz drummer. I bet you can't do double bass, bro. And then that's how you get a fucking 15-year-old to start doing.
That's right. That's right.
It's called a blasphemy.
Wow. So what about some of the shows that you were going to at the time? Were you going to shows?
So that's the other thing. Is just that I really wasn't. At the time.
Yeah.
Like I said, my grandmother was really sick all the time, and I had already been getting in enough trouble.
For sure.
Where it was like,
but staying out all night.
I don't want to be the reason that this lady keels over.
Sure.
And like she died before I was even 18.
Wow.
But for the last few years of her life, she was living with a failed lung. She had one lung, and like, you know, she had. The funny thing, she wasn't a smoker. She like just secondhand smoked from when she was a little girl, and that kind of just like rained down on her. About a year after that, you know, she passed away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I see. Wow. Damn. Now, when you were getting into this kind of music, were your grandparents
Oh, they
aware
were
that?
totally against it.
Yeah.
It's hilarious, man. It's funny because one story that I like to tell is that you know, you only have so many resources as a kid,
Yeah.
especially in that era. So like, even though like to us, like if you're a punk or like a real metalhead, like Hot Topic was like, "Oh, get that shit away from me," you know.
Yeah.
But the thing is that Megadeth put up, oh yeah, they're doing a giveaway, and they're giving away all the remasters that they did of their first hand whatever albums from like, I don't think they did Killing of a Business, so it was from like Peace Cells to like Euthanasia, I think.
I see.
And
Yeah.
or Cryptic Writings, so what up to the '90s stuff, and they were giving away 4 shirts along with it.
Wow.
So I entered not thinking that I could win. I was like, I saw the entry stuff, and it didn't say you had to be 18 to enter.
Yeah.
So I'm like, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
And I won. So
Wow.
so one day I get home and I see a box, and I'm like, it has my name, and I'm like, oh shit, this is CDs. And I get the CDs, and my grandparents are livid. They're like, they're not happy about it, but I'm like, well, these are mine.
Yeah.
But what's it called? They definitely tossed the shirts though. Yeah, I never got to even see them.
You didn't even see them. Oh
Yeah,
my god.
like, try to email Hot Topic about that shit. They, yeah, sorry, kid, we sent you this shit. Like, tough nuts, you know. Like, I had friends in school who like were into the same shit too.
Yeah.
And like, I would get gear off of them. So like, if I had a belt or something or whatever, and like I would sneak that shit in. And it's funny because I had a tuba at home that I would practice. I would hide the shit inside the horn.
That's a good hiding spot.
I don't know how the fuck they found it.
Damn.
So like whatever like bracelets or whatever that we were rocking at the time, like gone, whatever.
Wow.
But you know, it's one of those things where it's just like you want to fight it, but at the same time, you just let it be.
That's right.
Yeah, for the sake of some like semblance of peace.
Yeah.
Yeah, like. Yeah.
Now, what are some ways that you would like, get music, down on
LimeWire.
stuff? Yeah.
LimeWire.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, giving my computer AIDS.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any like friends who would burn stuff for you or that kind of stuff? Anything like
I
that?
had a teacher in junior high school who actually, now that I think about it, like, I was, like I said, I was into like Suicidal and DRI, and I was into like, just some, I guess I don't know if you would even call that like entry level stuff, because nowadays I feel like you have to go through a different section of stuff to get there.
Yeah, that's right.
But I told him what I was into and everything. I'm like, yo, I'm trying to find more shit like this.
Yeah.
And like, what's funny is that because of whatever was on radio, at least I wasn't aware that I had heard Metallica or anything before. And he was like the biggest Metallica fan. He's like, here's Master of Puppets, man.
Yeah.
And I was like a 7th grader, and I'm like, holy shit.
Uh-huh.
And he gave me Megadeth's Rust in Peace, and then he gave me a mix of a bunch of stuff. And I remembered like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, and oddly enough, like Alice in Chains, Rob Zombie was on there.
Okay, yeah.
I'm trying to think of like, goddamn, what else was on there? I can't really recall, but it was that kind of entry level metal stuff where it was like, I'd never heard of it before, but this is amazing,
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
And like, we're kids who play instruments and everything too, so it gave me something to like want to achieve.
Yeah.
Like you play bass and you hear Steve Harris of Iron Maiden, and you're like, I want to do that shit.
Yeah.
I want to get to that level.
Yeah.
You know?
And when you're playing bass more and more through school, are you also like playing along with
albums and shit?
with albums
Hell
and stuff? Yeah.
Trying to play by ear, trying to figure out what you can.
Yeah.
My audition song for the music school that I went to, I did Stevie Wonder.
Okay.
Because it's a really tough bass line, really tough bass part in the center where like all the instruments are just playing in like unison.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was just, I got a lot of different musical influences coming in from all areas.
Yeah.
But that was just from my curiosity, because like I wasn't gonna get it from home. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
And especially with like the opposition from like the church and everything, and everybody just telling me like, oh, this is like evil stuff and all that. It's like,
Now, did there come a point, during these years where, you stopped going to church with your grandparents? Did you ever swing that?
So the thing is, like, it was always like kind of a reluctant thing,
Yeah.
where it was like, there was always kind of, I wouldn't say like a veiled threat or anything, but it was more like, you live in this house, you got to do this.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. And the thing is, again, it's like, I feel like it's easier to tell a parent no to a degree, as much it was more difficult for me to look at my grandparents and be like no.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the thing is that at
Totally.
one point I actually did really strongly believe,
Yeah.
and then there was actually a time in my life where the opposite happened, and for the sake of God, I cut out punk and metal and all that stuff,
I see, I
and
see,
I
I
dedicated
see.
myself to like studying the scriptures for a long time,
Wow,
or
wow.
to the point where like I wasn't like a pastor or anything with them, but I was able to give talks in churches.
Wow, wow. What kind of age range are we talking about for that part of your life?
17 to about 19, 20
Oh,
ish.
okay, okay. And was that when you were in
Yeah, well,
North Carolina,
when I
Florida,
moved down
North Carolina?
to the south, yeah.
I see, I
Yeah.
see. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. So you probably got rid of everything then and like
Yeah, well, it's
cut
funny.
it
I
out.
gave it to a homegirl from high school. I was like, yo, I'm moving down south and all this shit. Like, you can hold on to my CDs, whatever. If I
Yeah.
ever come back, whatever, if I ever want these back, I'll hit you up.
Yeah.
And she moved to Seattle by the time I came back. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Now, do you want to talk some about, what things were like in Florida and North Carolina for you?
I mean, it's a weird culture shift.
Yeah.
It's absolutely the first time in my life that anybody ever called me a spick. Yeah. Where I was like, what the, like, and I remember the first time that I ever went to North Carolina. I was at a gas station. So I lived in a town called Mooresville,
Okay.
which is like maybe 15 minutes north of Charlotte.
Yeah.
And I still got that Bronx in me, So like, this redneck sees me, and I got like 2007, 2008. My pants are a little baggy.
Yeah.
I got a little bit of a baggy shirt, whatever. I got like a fitted hat, whatever. And I think it was like a blue Dodgers hat. I still had that little bit of California.
Yeah, sure,
vibe
sure,
in me.
sure.
So I walk in, and for some reason this guy like gives me an attitude and like bumps into me, whatever. And I try to be kind. I'm like, hey, sorry about that, brother. And he goes, oh, I said bro, and I just remember the tone of his voice. He goes, I'm not your bro, man. And it's like, all right, bro. And I pulled my pants up and I said, you better put your fucking hands up. And like, my uncle walks in and he's like, yo, you all right? And then the guy sees, I guess there's two people, and he runs out the store. He doesn't even finish purchasing whatever he was gonna get. But it was funny because it was like I'm trying to shift my life. I'm trying to like become more godly or whatever. But like those semblances of like that instinct of being from New York, because again, it's just of never having a choice.
Yeah.
Of just having to do, what you did here.
Yeah.
And like bringing that into a new locale where perhaps people don't tend to act this way.
Yeah.
But like, it's funny because like in New York, I always felt like I was the white boy.
Yeah.
But when I went down south, they know.
Yep.
It's like, oh, you look kind of, but you're not one of us.
Yeah, for sure.
I remember I worked at a Sears for a little while, and this kid, good intention, nice-hearted kid, he goes, hey, man, where are you from? And I said, I'm from New York. He goes, oh, no, man, I mean, like, where are you from? And I tell him, if you're asking my ethnicity, I'm Puerto Rican. He goes, oh, that's what it is, man. And he goes, so how'd you get here from Puerto Rico, man? Did you guys, like, drive? Or, like, I'm like, there was a globe in one of the aisles, and I took him to it. I was like, yeah, come with me real quick. And I spun the globe, and I stopped it, and I pointed at Puerto Rico. This is where Puerto Rico is, right here.
Yeah.
He's like, it's funny because I always heard the joke, but like I thought it was just like something the comedian said.
Yeah.
And then out of his mouth comes, also like Puerto Rico's not a part of Mexico. And I'm like, yeah, dude, no. And like the girl who was working with us at the Sears at the time, like she like dropped her hands into her head and she goes, "Oh my God, you are so red. You are so red." She had her honeymoon in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, yeah.
So like she knew much better than he did.
For sure.
You know.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Wow. Now, what was behind your decision to like eventually come back to New York and all of that?
So, the economy was still just really down after the recession, and
Yeah.
I was just like, I need to find a shift. Like in North Carolina, like you you can't get a car without a license. You can't get a license without insurance. You can't get insurance without a car.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So unless you have somebody helping you out in that regard,
There's no
like,
way.
There's no way to do it.
Yep.
So I had to. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna pick up, come back to New York. At least I got public transportation. Things are starting to stabilize and everything. So
Yeah.
I was able to make do.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you came back to New York, were you still like in your religious phase?
I was at first.
Yeah.
And then the thing is that like again, I wanted to become like in their church what was kind of like the equivalent to like a pastor or whatever.
Yeah.
And just like the scriptures really started disturbing my conscience.
Yeah.
Like I'm reading about the slaughter of the Amalekites. I'm reading about like, Second of Kings where like Prophet Elisha comes and like feeding two female bears and a bunch of children for calling them bald headed.
Yep.
And I'm reading about the position of women in Second of Corinthians and Second of Timothy. I suffer not a woman to teach, all these kinds of things, and I'm just like, man, ideologically, I'm just not aligned.
Yeah.
With any of if this is the God that I'm worshiping, like I like, it bothered my God. Like I cried genuinely, like I cried tears, and like I prayed for weeks on end that like my faith would be restored, and that like these doubts in my mind would be silenced. But the more I read and the more I studied and the more like I threw myself into scripture, I was just like, holy shit, man, this is devastatingly evil.
Yep.
Like reading about slavery in the Bible and like, one of the weirder things, and like I don't mean to get too into the topic of religion in this sense, but
fine.
the thing is that there were just things that didn't make sense to me. Like, okay, there was a year of jubilee if you were a Jewish slave, and you would be able to be released. But if you had taken on a wife and kids while you were a slave and you decided to leave, they wouldn't be able to leave with you. I was like, what kind of God would like add that sort of sentiment into like that? That's such an unnecessary stipulation. Just let me stay with my family.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, any man who has a wife and children is gonna choose to stay with their family, and that was one of the things that just knocked on me. And I'm just like, I don't believe this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And how long did that whole process take?
To this day, you're always unlearning shit.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like in my life, in multiple senses, like I had to unlearn a lot of the sexism that was instilled in me unintentionally.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
the thing is that I'll say that I don't think that people in these religious places are badly meaning. They're not poor meaning. It's
That's
just
right.
it's just that they're so indoctrinated by something that was written by goat farmers like thousands of years ago.
Yep. That's right. That's
like,
right.
It's funny because I've had several conversations with people who try to win me back, and I feel uncomfortable having like the deeper conversations with them because it's like faith shaking or whatever. But like I'll have a simple conversation where like in Jeremiah, like there's a text that says that, that's why I put the sands on the shores there to protect you from the water coming in. But it's like, yeah, you're in the Middle East. You don't know what a hurricane is.
Yeah.
You've never seen a tsunami, so you didn't think that when you wrote that text.
That's right.
It's just
That's
so
right.
like that's the kind of question that I'll implant as opposed to like saying something more like earth shattering.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Wow. Now, with your whole process of, kind of divorcing yourself from your religious upbringing and all at this point in time, were you getting back into music at the same time?
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
So like the first thing that I did, well, I always had my guitars and I was always still playing music.
Yeah.
And the thing is that I always had a hunger and a desire to play things that were like, I don't know if more aggressive is the right term, but like also like just more technically bound or whatever.
Yeah.
And just something that was going to be more fun to me. So the thing is that like I started getting into more like jazz guitars
Okay.
and like, you know, listening to more BB King or like George Benson and
Sure.
like, you know, because that was the most challenging thing to my ear that I could listen to that was still like entertaining and, you know, pushing my boundaries
Yeah.
while I was in such a closed off ideology, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was kind of the thing that kind of kept me pushing to a degree.
I see. I see.
Because I was so bored.
Yeah.
Like musically, I was just like so starved.
Yeah.
But I still had that influence from other music that I liked.
Yeah.
But it was like, it's not the same without having that thing that really drives you. And that punk, hardcore, metal was the thing that my soul was missing.
For sure.
You know?
And what pushed you back over the edge into, you know, the hardcore punk metal realm at that point in time?
I think it was, it never really went away inside of me. It's just, you know, after like I started like breaking away from everything, I think the first thing I turned on Pandora radio and I think I just put like thrash metal.
Yeah.
And Testament came on and it was like, it was as if like a weight had lifted from my shoulders. Like DNR came on and like that's Dave Lombardo and you're like, holy shit. Master of his craft, just doing some shit, and you're like, yeah, I need to be around this again.
Absolutely.
And that's when I started actually going out to shows and everything and meeting people and like getting linked up. And it's funny because some of the first shows that I went to when I first moved back to New York, it wasn't Irate, but it was Judas Syndrome.
Oh,
which was still Phil from Irate.
Of course.
And like, and it's funny because I ended up playing on a softball team with a couple of the guys that were playing guitar in Judas Syndrome at the time, and like becoming friends with a lot of those guys. You know, and you start meeting people from different circles. You start going to all different kinds of shows and everything, and like you're going to the punk shows and meeting those guys, and going to the metal shows and meeting those guys. And I was just hungry. I was just hungry. I was like, I need to break out. I need to like find who I am actually musically. And that's when I found the bandmates who were my first band. That was Bomb Scare.
Okay, Bomb Scare.
Like, it's like a crossover thrash punk band, which took all like a lot of the influences of everything that I liked at the time. And I was like, met this dude at a Dave Mustaine's book signing for his autobiography, and he was a drummer. His name's Steve. He plays drums now in this cool death metal band called Festergore. And shout out to them. And this kid who I was just hanging out with, his name was Will, who also played guitar. And we just started jamming out. And then eventually met just north of the Bronx, this guy Rob Cullen, who ended up playing bass with us for some time. And eventually lineup shifts, and I started meeting people in Queens. And my buddy Jimmy Carnage, who plays in number of bands these days, Demencia Alcoholica and Furia, and he's been a big part of that like Queen scene. He actually if you see a show being put on at Shillelagh's, he's probably the guy who's like providing the backline and doing all that shit, and he's become like a mainstay of like that heart of Queens, you know. So but that was we started playing at a time where like we were going out to punk shows out in Elmhurst, and that's when like Hilltop Tavern and everything was like a big spot and all that. And like we're like, well, we're playing music. And then Tom Reardon, who was in Seizure Crypt at the time, was like, yo, we put on shows here on the time, dude, you guys want to play? And it was at a time where like, you know, we're a bunch of broke kids. Like, I'm still from the South Bronx, and I'm like, you know, I have no training or education because I had dedicated myself to religion for so long that I have forgone like a formal education. I didn't have like any necessary life skills or anything. I'm out here like scrapping along with whatever job I can find. You know? And you know, we were just a bunch of poor punks who like just started trying to record. We did like some cell phone recording or some shit. Like, no, it was a goddamn, what's the name of that place? I think it was called Ruby's, Roxy's.
Okay, Roxy's.
It was a like a rehearsal spot that was down in Long Island City. And met a lot of bands. It's funny because like one day like I'm hearing a sound that was familiar, and I'm just like, what the hell's going on here? And it was No Redeeming Social Value. And I'm like, And
Same
to me at
rehearsal
the
spot, huh?
same, yeah, and the thing is that like at the time I don't know any of these people,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I'm like 20, 21 years old, and like I know these bands because I had found them through like the internet,
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
and it's like I know that song,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and then like you know we end up coming out at the same time to pay because our rehearsals ended at the same time, and it's like, dude, you guys are fucking awesome,
Yeah.
and everything, and then like I don't even know if Glenn remembers this, but he started telling us about like that they were gonna play with ICP at the time, and that was story. We see them after like sometime, and he's like, yeah, they fucking booed us off. They
I can
fucking hated
imagine.
us. And I remember saying, it's like, you guys aren't punk rock. I know punk rock, and you're not punk rock. Like kind of shit. I don't
Wow.
even know if like, cause it's funny, cause like I see Glenn all the time now,
Yeah.
but like I don't know if he remembers that was actually
That's
me.
funny.
Yeah, I was
Wow.
growing my hair out at the time. I had like semi-long hair and
Yeah.
everything. So you go through all these shifts and phases, but the thing is that like, um, even politically, like once I started breaking out of all of that, like I think a lot of people say that nihilism leads to despair.
Yeah.
But for me, nihilism was the most liberating thing that I ever came across.
Sure.
Because the thing is that everything didn't need a purpose.
Yeah.
Where like, for me before, this idea of eternal life and blessing with God and all that was such a motivating driver.
Yeah.
Where like the moment that I started thinking to myself that this doesn't exist was like a rug pull.
Yeah.
It was as if the world that I was standing on got pulled out from under my feet, and now I got to find my own meaning.
Yeah.
Nihilism provided that. It was like, holy shit. But at the same time, like, the sympathy, the empathy that I had in my heart that led me away from scripture also led me to the political movements that I started attaching myself with at the time. And I started like connecting with political groups and talking to people and like, getting these pamphlets and
For
like
sure.
reading up about like political movements and everything.
For
and,
sure.
Reading about Puerto Rican liberation and understanding the history of my own country and understanding all these things, but also having my own attachment and my own like semblances of whatever. So like that influenced a lot of the music that I wrote, because I was still having the influence of the punk that I grew up with. Like I took that to my own degree.
Yeah.
Like and wrote songs about like not necessarily like being against the idea of patriotism or anything, but more so the idea that like these are all ideas that divide people. It's like, so whether you attach yourself to any form of ideology, it's all some form of tribalism, so whether you're like a nationalist or you're an anarchist or you're any one of these people, it's a label that we're assigning to ourselves. And like for the longest time I tried to stay away from labels.
Yeah.
Like I didn't even try to use the word nihilist until many years later in my life. But it was just the idea that we had to cut out these barriers, which was something that I would always say, like when we used to play shows, like, we're here to cut these barriers down, we're here to cut these lines, we're here to make it so like we're all like one people.
Yeah.
But it's like, and for a while that worked. Like I felt like every room that we went to, like everybody was going along, where like you had skinheads coming up to the mic screaming "fuck the flag" in my choruses.
Wow.
Like, and those dudes were hanging out with us, and everybody was like, in a sense, like kind of vibing.
Yeah.
And, I think people aren't aware of how susceptible everybody truly is.
Yeah.
To some degree, you think you're beyond influence, but like everybody's influenced to some degree.
For sure.
And like that, I started seeing the shifts in people and people attaching themselves to certain ideas and everything. And then I started seeing people who used to get along before no longer getting along. So that's one thing that like, even with my musical philosophy, like I try to keep the door open to everybody.
Yeah.
Like may not necessarily agree with you, but I'm always willing to come to the table.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, if we look at the landscape, it doesn't matter like who you are, like politically, musically. Like I don't like these kind of bands because they're attached to this sort of thing. the reality of the matter is you're not gonna go out there and kill everybody.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to deal with everybody at one point or another. So here's a table. Let's talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, with your first band, do you remember, you know, where all you would play? Like, what are some of the spots you play at?
Hilltop was like our CBGBs at the time, you know.
Yeah.
But the thing is that like we started also hanging around like a lot of like, you know, dirtier punks and crust stuff and everything. So like,
Sure.
like Acheron became like the second home.
Oh, okay.
And the Acheron was like the day that place closed was like what I imagine like everybody experienced when CB's closed. You know?
I
It was just
see.
like that was like a stab through the heart. Where it
Yeah.
was just like every great show that I saw like was there, and but then, you know, it's funny because like so many places just changed over names. Black Bear Bar used to be this and that, and Bar Matchless was this and that.
Yeah.
And you know, all these places that were around before just either change names, change hands, or just plainly just don't exist anymore.
That's
know?
right. That's
So,
right.
Like you saw Brooklyn shift. It's funny because like one thing I didn't mention from before, but the one way that I was able to get out
Yeah.
as a kid was skateboarding.
Oh, okay.
And that was from the punk stuff too.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
So like we used to skate the Brooklyn Bridge, or you used to go to TF, which was right off the Brooklyn Bridge stop. Like you were hanging out with these kind of people too, but you remember that area of Brooklyn. You remember how empty it was, and then you remember like Williamsburg not really having shit.
Yeah.
You know, and then seeing the William Vale Hotel pop up, and you're like fucking 5-star hotel right where we used to fucking set up cones and, you know, fucking those barrier blockers that police use and skate there.
Yep.
Like, and now, like, this is completely different from the place that we grew up in.
In such a quick amount of time too. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now how, like, around how many years were, you know, you together with your first band?
So Bomb Scare lasted from, we all met like late 2009, early 2010.
Yeah.
And we went on to, I think it was like 2018. Yeah.
So good amount of time.
We released one EP, and like we had a bunch of songs that we never recorded. Which,
I see.
I'm currently like trying to work out myself, like to do under a new name, new band. Like I felt like, and this is no offense to those guys because I still got a lot of love for every single one of them.
Yeah.
But like there was an ethical stand to what the band was, you know. Like we played a couple of the fundraisers for the original Occupy Wall Street movement.
Oh wow, okay,
Like where
sure.
like they duped us into thinking that like Anti-Flag was gonna be pulling up or whatever. Where he actually did before he was outed as the predator that he is.
Yeah.
For the record. He actually did come out to a lot of the protests and everything, and you know, spoke on a megaphone, whatever. But like said that they were gonna bring the band through and everything. But like we still did the fundraisers, whatever. It's a good time. You know, we always try to like involve ourselves in the community in one way or another. But like when that started to go away, I felt like ethically we weren't the same band anymore.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's time to end.
Yeah.
It's time to end because like this is not what I want this to become.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And rather than drag it out, like, cause we had a bit of, like, not to gas my own head up because, you know, I'm not that kind of person, but we had a bit of a following going, and we had great shows and great times and met a lot of cool people.
Yeah.
You know, got to make a lot of awesome interactions and everything. So like I'll never regret anything about that time, but it's just who I am as a person. I just ethically I couldn't keep it going under the same name, and some like Ache started 2014, a few years before that break, and I had just gone back to college because I started realizing like I can't live in basements for the rest of my fucking life, man. I got to do something.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm playing in 2 bands, going to college, and working full time.
Wow.
And eventually, Bomb Scare breaks up, Ache continues, and I guess that's when, you know, I actually I was blessed. I was very lucky at a time. I went on tour one time with Eddie Leeway when he was getting his round back. It's funny because like his first show back, Ache played as his backing band with Mike Kaufman on bass, and I was guitar for that. So I got to play guitar for that round. But then when I went on tour with him, I was on bass.
That's amazing.
And met a lot of cool dudes. I knew Matty Pasta from before, but like great dude, and being on the road with him and Dimmy, who was from Still Suit,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Crown of Thorns, a bunch of other bands, great bands. Like getting to hang out on the road with those guys was like definitely a cool and influential experience for a kid who was like in his early 20s. You know.
Wow.
You know, on that tour it was awesome because we played a benefit for this kid with cancer. I feel bad that I don't remember the name. Down in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And I remember like thinking just like, you know, because a lot of the bands on that tour were just kind of like, and I don't like to speak bad about people, but the thing is that like perhaps not necessarily like a Leeway show.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it didn't necessarily like Concealed Blade in West Virginia was awesome. They were like they sounded like Negative Approach.
Yeah.
Fucking great. There were bands along the tour that were like that, but a lot of them were just like this. You know, it's funny. You've interviewed Billy Club. You spoke to Irate. Where these are, you know, they were like beatdown bands.
Yeah.
They're beatdown bands who had their influences grounded here.
That's
you
right.
know, where like the beatdown bands that were playing at that time were just like they weren't influenced by punk. They weren't necessarily influenced by the same metal. They were like kids who came over from like deathcore or like metalcore and like whatever other stuff, new metal, and like we're playing like 5-minute songs that were like one breakdown, and it's like, dude, this is dragging.
Yep.
But you know, respect to them for still pushing, doing their hustle, and like making the music that they want to make and everything. But it didn't vibe.
Yeah.
But there was one band that really stuck out that I was like, this is not the same, and it was in Indianapolis, and they were like, I think the second or third band that night. Yeah, and I should mention, we were the co-headliner. Bane was actually on the same date.
Wow.
So
okay.
that was a great show.
Damn.
But the band that was one of the openers was Knocked Loose.
Oh man.
And I'm like, and watching these dudes,
Wow.
and we played in this church in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, yo, these dudes are gonna be fucking huge, man.
And they are.
Yeah, I was
Now.
like, dude, these guys are gonna be fucking huge.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, with Bomb Scare, did you all play outside of New York at all, or are you mostly in the city?
So our bass player went to college upstate in Albany.
Okay.
So like we got a funny story about like playing the frat house up there and everything.
Yeah.
And like we never went too far out. We went as far as like Jersey,
Yeah, sure.
Albany, and stuff like that. Again, we were like poor kids. We didn't really
Sure.
have the means to be able to do much. Barely had the means to record.
Yeah.
You know, like recorded demos at our drummer's brother's house.
Yeah.
With like his Apple computer and like connected DI into like, you know, like a little interface, whatever.
For sure.
Like the kind of demos that I would make at home right now.
That's right.
Like just to show my guys like, hey man, check out this riff and like these programmed drums that I added to it.
Yeah.
Except like trying to do something serious with that and just didn't work out. And then when we actually did record our EP, it was with Danny, who was in back in the day he was in Shai Hulud, and I met him when he was playing with No Dice, who was a hardcore punk band from Queens at the time, and was the captain of my softball team.
Man, that softball team.
Yeah.
That's the same one that Judas Syndrome members were on?
Yeah.
Wow.
So like
Damn.
it was all dudes from like the New York hardcore scene
Yeah.
and like that era of dudes, and it's funny because like, you know, our shirt logo was kind of like the Madball logo almost, you know. So
Wow.
yeah, it was fun.
Wow.
Shout out to Danny too. He won league MVP 1 year at the All-Star game.
Wow. Now, how'd you meet the people in Ake?
So through playing shows with Bomb Scare. It's
Okay.
funny. Like I have so much love and respect for Ryan as a vocalist and as a front man, and like, you know, the more I've gotten to know him as a person, you know, and like he was a black punk at a time where like, you know, that was not seen. It was not really accepted, you
Yeah.
know, like people weren't necessarily kind.
Yeah.
To keep it polite, you know, they weren't really nice to people like that. Like you see a kid with a green mohawk, he's black, and it's
Yeah.
like, you know, it's funny. He was on one of those daytime shows. Like we see the clip where it was not like a Jerry Springer type, but it was like one of those women who like would do the talk shows. They bring the parents out.
Yep,
Like, my
yep, yep,
son
yep.
is like this, whatever.
Yep.
And it's like it's such a funny memory because now, in hindsight, Ryan and his mom look at that moment as like, such a growing point for them. But
Yeah.
it's like, yo, this dude was an innovator in a sense.
That's right.
When Afropunk started coming up and everything, he's rocking with Jane Spooner and he's with those people, and I'm like learning more about this dude by being friends with him.
Yeah.
He was playing in a band called Dead Serious at the time, and Ake's first drummer, also named Brian, they were both in that band, and like we were all hanging out and shit. The Matt, our guitarist, was in Abject, which has a few guys from out here in Yonkers.
Yep.
And and Chucky.
And Chucky, yeah.
And Chucky, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Shout out Chuck, great dude. But yeah, so like Dead Serious broke up, and Matt and Ryan are talking. They're like, "Yeah, let's do a band together."
Yeah.
And like, so Ryan, and Matt started doing a band, and then one day, I received a Snapchat from Ryan, and like, all right, cool. Ryan's like sending me a Snapchat, and I click it, and it's him, Ryan, and Matt, and they're like, "Hey, dude, we just started a new band, and we want you to play bass. We practice on Thursdays. We'll see you at 7." It wasn't even like they asked me to be in it.
It's just like you're gonna be in it. Here's the
do it.
time and place.
But like, it's funny because they had like not necessarily like an argument, but more so like because Ryan had a lot of respect for me as a front man,
Yeah.
and like for someone who like was able to command a stage or whatever, which is what he's told me.
Yeah.
And he's like, I can't ask this dude to step down to let me take center stage. That's the kind of humble guy that Ryan is, where he's like more so thinking about insulting me by asking me to play bass in a band with him,
Yeah.
so he could be in front.
Yeah.
It's like he felt like it was almost insulting, and I was like,
Yeah.
like, dude, I'd be honored. Like it would be amazing. And like,
Yeah.
now, like, a little more than 10 years in, 2 albums and a demo, like, I'm really thankful for all the opportunities and everything that being in a band with him, has brought me musically. Like it's housed a lot of, the ideas musically, sonically, and even emotionally.
Yeah.
That like we've been able to put together.
Absolutely. I mean, y'all have done so much with Ake as far as even with a couple lost years with the pandemic and all.
COVID and all. Yeah.
But you in thinking back on all the shows you played, all the songs you recorded. Let's start with shows first. Are there shows that like stick out in your mind as like the ones that like really stuck with you?
So there's certain things that like really pop out, and I think like early on was just the people that gave us a chance.
Yeah.
And like so being able to play alongside like Caught in a Trap and everything, and these mainstays of the New York hardcore scene who like gave us a house. We're playing Grand Victory like pretty often, and then getting into St. Vitus and being able to like be there all the time and everything too. And I don't want to say like becoming kind of like a house band, but like we got to play a lot of the really good shows there.
Yeah.
And like that kind of like era of darker hardcore.
Yep.
Like we got to play alongside a lot of those shows. We got to play like Trap Them's last tour, which was an amazing thing for us because that was like one of our, as a band, like that's kind of where our influence started shifting, to that darker area. Because the thing is just like hardcore is amazing, but it's like, we don't want to do everything that we were already influenced.
That's
to do,
right.
You
want to do something new.
We want to take it to like a different place.
Yeah.
Like lyrically, emotionally, sonically, and that's not to downplay anyone who is keeping it to the roots, because the thing is, I feel like that's still like a necessary thing, because
sure.
Music is a timestamp. Music is like your way of letting the world know this is what it was like to be alive at this time.
Yeah.
This is what it was like to be me. This is what it was like to be a person from this area.
Yeah.
This is what it was like to observe the world and life from my perspective, from our perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe you're writing about something that's, completely irrelevant to yourself. So this is how I saw things.
Yeah.
And that's your timestamp forever. you recorded that song that's gonna exist to some degree until the sun goes nebula and everything we know is gone.
Yep.
But until that happens, that's your point. That is your mark on the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the really interesting things about Ache, I think, at least in the context of, you know, all of the oral histories that are part of this so far, is like, you know, you hear such emotional depth in Ache's songs. Now, if you go back to the 90s, like you mentioned, it's not really that common. I mean, you know, it's still there, but like the emotional depth isn't necessarily right in your face as much, except with bands like, you know, Fahrenheit 451
Hell yeah.
and like District 9 and stuff. Like
Yeah, dude, I was
it's crazy. Like you're a
I was just
continuation.
running that
and-
District 9 album at work. Like,
Yeah.
The other day, just like, because, you know, again, sometimes you just get that hunger. You want to
Yeah.
just bump something that's familiar, feels comfortable. Like, you know, I feel like the older I get, I turn 36 tomorrow.
Yeah.
And like, you know, they're just things that I grew up with and things that I listen to now where it's just like, it feels like comfort food.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know?
For sure.
Where it's just like, this puts me in a place where it's just like, you know, this feels like a warm bath in a sense where it's
Yeah.
just like, I could just lay here.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But yeah, the emotion in Ache, man, it's like there's not there's not a whole lot of other bands that have that same.
So the thing is, I feel like, you know, especially in hardcore, people were expressing it. They just had a different way of
That's right.
expressing that same emotion.
That's right.
You know, it like you can read some old like agnostic front lyrics and be
For
able
sure.
to connect like probably what Roger was thinking like when he was writing those songs or whatever. Or you can. So New York had, I feel like, a different swag to it.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, people were just discovering how to make this thing into something tangible, you
Yeah.
know? Like, I'm feeling this thing. I feel and I see the world around me. Like I was just
That's
saying,
right.
you know? It's hard to put to words because the thing is that, like, I'm trying to describe what somebody else felt to
For
a
sure.
degree, you know?
For sure.
But it's just like my interpretation of, like, I collect vinyl.
Yeah.
And like I have a lot of these old albums, and like I like to sit down, play a record, and read through the lyric sheet, and go and try to understand like what was this person thinking when they wrote this.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, were they feeling something?
Yeah.
And the thing is that like one thing that the reason I span over so many genres of music is because I connect to realness. I connect to an emotion. I connect
Sure.
to something that like somebody felt something and they wanted to write it down.
Yeah.
Whereas like it's not some like amalgamated piece of bullshit where like a bunch of people just collectively just wrote a song for the sake of writing a song.
Yeah. That's
You know,
right.
like I feel like you can sometimes smell that out.
Yeah.
But I feel like that exists so much less in like hardcore and
For
punk.
sure.
you
For
know?
sure.
I feel like to a degree it exists way more in metal.
Yeah.
Which is why like I always end up coming back to the hardcore and the punk.
Yeah, it's true. It's
It's
true. I
like-
mean, there's a lot of metal songs that, you know, even the lyrics are about nothing.
Yeah,
It seems
I mean,
like, but
look, I mean, I understand. Like, I get it. You like horror movies,
Yeah,
or whatever,
yeah.
or, you know. Well, again, I think it depends,
yeah, it does.
but you can tell when somebody felt something and they
Yeah.
wanted to write it down, or they wanted to make it a sonical representation of themselves.
That's
you
right.
know? Yeah.
That's right. Now, what about with songs, with like Ache songs? What are some of the songs that, you know, speak most to you, or that you think are most expressive of what you're
So-
going for?
Ryan really puts a lot of himself into this music.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I feel like I'm so lucky to be able to like perform with him.
Yeah.
Or even add like music to the things that he comes up with, because the thing is that like we have songs like one of the songs that we have was based on a poem that a friend of his mom's wrote after his friend passed away.
Yeah.
So his friend passed away, and his mom wrote this like eulogy to him in a poem and put in the newspaper. He didn't find it until years later.
Wow.
And like he was like, those are some beautiful words, and I need to turn this into a song.
Yeah.
And like that became, you know, one of our songs. He has songs about like terrible experiences. We have a song on the new album of like when he was a kid, he saw this woman take her own life in her car, like shot herself in the head
Yeah.
while like, you know, sitting in a car. I guess he was taking out the trash or something. We just happened to catch that, you know. We have songs about like his father when he served in the military, you know, being on burial detail,
Yeah.
and like having to experience that part of life. So the thing is that like there's no happy endings in our songs, so to say, you know. But it's just like it's I feel like an unexplored form of the human psyche in a sense, where like, you know, it's not a taboo so much these days anymore. But the thing is like, yeah, like if I was to like be at an office party and start talking about this kind of shit, people might want to like not hang around me to a sense. But the thing is that like when you're sitting by yourself and you're contemplating life and you're thinking about these things, you're like, these are real experiences. You know, people listen to true crime shit all the time.
For sure.
Know? Or like people like the dark and the grimoire, or like things that just like people gain curiosity to. But at the same time, like, we're not here trying to dress up in like black makeup and everything and like fucking be super spooky about it.
Yeah.
We're just trying to give a regular guy's perspective of like, damn, like this is some dark shit.
Yeah.
And this is what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
You know? Like but the thing is that like there's so much death, like personal death and personal connection to like the music that we write, that it's sometimes hard, you know? Like for Ryan especially, when we recorded the vocals for this last album, it was just like I don't mean to like expose too much about him, but he's pretty straightforward about this kind of stuff, you know? Like he'll say it on stage, this song is about these terrible panic attacks that I used to get, and like, you know, it like he puts himself in the moment when he's into these songs. And that's again the thing that I mentioned about realness, about like, you know, really putting a soul into something as opposed to just releasing it's like lifeless thing. And then I think that's the most important thing of when we write something. Right now we're working on a 5-song EP that I don't want to say too much about, because I kind of want like the concept to be as much a surprise to people as like when it comes out. But it's another experience where like the process doesn't get easier, you know? And we're taking the worst of ourselves, like the most depressing aspects and the most, you know, breaking things that we experience, and putting them into a form that somebody could relate to. I was just thinking about it today because one of my best friends, he was the vocalist in this band called Leave. He was also in this band called the Hudson Horror, which is like a melodic death metal band, but Leave was more like post-hardcore, but more like heavy. And he passed away 2 years ago on April 9th. Well, I found out about it on April 9th. And he was of the same ilk in the concept of like writing music and everything. And like I just think about it, and now listening to his voice, now that he's passed on, I feel like his because of how significant what he wrote was, it's like he's speaking to me through the music beyond the grave. You know? Yeah, he had this one song where like he starts contemplating about loss, and he's like, you know, he's not a man of faith, but he's like considering like, what if like just this one time I prayed so hard and consistently enough that long hand on the clock would turn back and turn the minutes into hours, into days, into years, and I could still be in your loving embrace. And it's like, holy shit. Like, who has not felt that?
For sure.
Like, who, like, and, you know, that's, you know, we like to connect on that same level with other artists and everything, too. Like, we've had the privilege of being able to, that's the thing about music, it's like being part of a scene. It's just being able to connect with people of a like mind, being able to connect with people of different experiences. You know, we've had, you were asking me about shows that we've appreciated playing recently. You know, we got to do Secret History of Black Punk. We got to do the release of James Spooner's graphic novel recently as well.
That's awesome.
And it's like, you know, these are special experiences, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I like the most,
Yeah.
is being able to like hear somebody's story.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. Wow. Now, either with Bomb Scare or Ache, did you all ever play, or have you played in the Bronx yet?
Um. No, we haven't. It's
Yeah, I
funny.
mean, not a whole lot of venues necessarily
No,
to
that
play
that's the
here and
thing.
there.
That's funny because like, you know, actually no, Bomb Scare did one time.
Okay, where
Yeah,
at?
we played Alfie's.
Oh, you.
Which,
Oh,
yeah,
oh, wait, that's right. That's right. You were saying that
thanks
earlier.
to
Yeah.
Davey of Enziguri. We, speaking of death again,
Yes. Yeah.
knock knock. Um, a friend of ours had passed away, and we did a benefit show for his family at Alfie's, and it was a beautiful night.
Yeah.
And we held a raffle. We had like a bunch of prizes and stuff, and people put in money, and like people made baked goods and sold shit there and everything. And it just shows again, musically, how different this community is than others. And
That's
like
right.
honestly, like I'm not saying that these things don't necessarily exist in other places, but they exist so commonly here.
That's right.
How many of us have not seen these benefit show flyers all the
I
time?
know. All the time.
I think that makes this place unique.
Yeah.
People might look down on it sometimes or say like, they can't understand it, or all the screaming or all this shit or whatever. And it's funny because especially coming from a musical background, like I try to be a humble person, but the thing is that especially when somebody takes a tone that way, and it's like, unless you could tell me the difference between an Aloian and a Mixolydian mode, I don't want to hear your fucking opinion about
right.
hardcore.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, unless you tell me how many steps I have to go down to go from a major to a minor, natural minor, like, I don't want to hear your fucking opinion about any of this.
That's right. Absolutely. Now, what about, not shows you yourself were playing, but do you remember, shows that you have
Attended?
come to in the Bronx before?
So again, it was one of those things where there just weren't very many venues, or at least the people that I knew didn't know of anything that was out here in the Bronx, and I just found out about everything in hindsight.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, the only place that I knew about in the Bronx was that one church that I guess they called it FLC or whatever.
Yeah.
And most of those shows were primarily like more like emo type gigs and everything.
That's right.
That wasn't what I was into, so that's not necessarily what I wanted to see. But every once in a while, there were friends who were like, again, people meet different people, you shake different hands, and sometimes you get a metal band or a punk band that's going on this,
That's right.
you end up in the same building with a bunch of people who you'd probably never meet otherwise.
That's right. Absolutely.
Excuse
Now there's a final question that I always ask at the end of these. Before we get to that question, I mean, I can tell there's so many parts of your life that you could talk about if you wanted to, but
Actually, I do want to, before we leave the show experience, and like, I would like to say that some of the biggest influences, or like at least musically for me, that made me think that like any of this shit is possible, was in high school. Like, I got to sit alongside some of the better Latin jazz musicians out there.
Okay,
so
like
I
who?
had to sit in with Johnny Pacheco.
Oh man.
And the flute player Valentin.
He
always used to blow it.
David, I think was his name. David.
I always slip on his first name, but he was he had the mustache.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I would always see him on television, like when my grandparents had like music on and stuff. So it was so crazy to be in the same room with him and have him sit in with us.
Wow.
And like being at another musical experience for me was being able to play at Lincoln Center as a kid.
Man.
And then the opposite of that, playing Lincoln Center in hardcore, was being able to play the Black and Blue Bowl with Leeway.
For sure.
So those were my two holy shit moments.
Yes. Man.
Yeah.
That's crazy. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was gonna ask if there's any other thing that we hadn't talked about that you wanted to, so I'm glad you brought that up. Are there other aspects of your life so far that you want to touch on that you haven't had a chance to talk about?
Um, I don't know if contemplating too much more about like my life necessarily itself, more so like where I wanted to go now.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
like my kind of theory about myself was like from the religious background, there's always these people who always try to say the end of the world is going to come on this day, end of the world is going to come on this day. It's funny because like I always think biblically, like there's a text that says, as far as the day and the hour nobody knows, not even the son, only the father.
Yeah.
But like to me, it's like I don't want to predict the end, I want to narrate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to be a narrator. I want to be the Morgan Freeman of like when this shit going down.
Well, you're living in the right era, I think.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. Wow.
If like I one day for some reason can't do it musically, then through words or whatever.
Yeah.
But like the thing is, I think music is, like I said, it's a reflection of who we are as people. It's a reflection of our time and everything. And the thing is, um, when you contemplate your own mortality and you contemplate the kind of life that you want to live or how you want to be remembered or anything, like I think the thing that I really care about is being able to be a person who, like I said before, about coming to the table with all different kinds of people.
Yeah.
If people didn't have patience with me and didn't wait for me to get out of old habits, I wouldn't be the person that I am now. So like I want to be that same person for other people.
Yeah.
I want to help people grow. I want to help people be better because I feel like so many people along the way helped me be better.
For sure.
Through music, through expression, through all these means. This scene has helped me become a better, more sympathetic and more empathetic person. Being here has helped me catch myself. So, however many years go by, I just want to be that for other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, the final question I have for you, do you think there's such a thing as like a Bronx heavy or hardcore sound? Something that's a little unique to the Bronx, or maybe it's not a sound, maybe it's something else. And how would you describe it if you think there is?
I wouldn't say that there was necessarily a sound, but
Yeah.
there was definitely and is still, I think, an attitude.
Yeah.
There's kind of like I think it just comes with being in the Bronx in general. Like our lifestyle was different. We came up at a different time, especially if you're like in our age bracket or like even up to a little bit younger, from the OGs to like maybe a generation just after mine.
Yeah.
Like you came up in a rough era. Like, and it's not just, you could feel the Bronx anywhere you go.
Yeah.
Like you'll see videos online of people outside the Bronx like acting Bronx, there's an acting Bronx, like there's a podcaster that I listen to, and it's my escape from reality besides music is video games.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is podcaster that grew up in the Batanzas projects right behind where I and he's like probably like in his late 40s. But the thing is that like people criticize him because when he meets somebody in the industry, like he fans out a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's like, yo dude, I totally get it. Like we grew up in a neighborhood where like they would slice your face for a North Face JanSport backpack. We grew across the street from St. Mary's Park where like gang initiations were happening all the time. And it's like you had to become numb to this shit.
Yeah.
So like, a lot of people think we're like cold or callous, but it's just we're hardened, you know? It's
That's
like
right.
you play guitar, your fingers eventually get hard. You live in the Bronx, in one way or another, part of you hardens.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to become numb to the world around you to a degree. And that's kind of like what the Bronx gave and what like the bands from here, I feel like even the younger cats out there right now.
Yeah.
I think that they're pushing that same energy right now.
For sure. For sure. Well, really incredible oral history so far. Is there anything else you want to share, in closing, or anything else, that we haven't talked about yet?
Nothing that can really pop up to mind, but I just want to reiterate that, like, super thankful to every person who ever put us on, who's ever given us an opportunity, and that, like, you know, was able to like showcase us to some sort of degree. And me personally, coming from here, again, like I said, you know, you don't think about this kind of thing when you're younger, it being like a real possibility. But we created a community, and we created like this thing that is self-replicating. No matter how much they try to break it down, no matter how many buildings close or change names, it pops up somewhere else. You know, it just keeps coming back up over and over. No matter how much like people try to shut it down, it just keeps coming right back up. So like, I'm real thankful to everybody who's, you know, had me in this community and allowed me to be a brother in this shit.